The sound of Jake's laugh echoing through my own hallway at 3 in the morning was the moment I realized I'd lost my home without even knowing there was a war. I sat in my leather recliner, the one piece of furniture Vanessa hadn't rearranged to accommodate our temporary house guest, nursing a whiskey and staring at the ceiling. Above me, the floorboards creaked with the rhythm of someone who'd made himself entirely too comfortable in what used to be my sanctuary. 6 months. Jake Morrison had been living in our guest room for 6 months, and every day felt like watching someone else wear your clothes while you stood exposed in the cold. Nick, you're up late. Vanessa appeared at the top of the stairs, her silk robe catching the light from the hallway. Even at 41, she was stunning, the kind of woman who turned heads at the grocery store and made other men wonder what she was doing with a bookstore manager like me. Hard to sleep with all the noise, I said, not looking up. She descended the stairs with that careful grace she'd perfected during her insurance adjuster training. Every movement calculated, every word measured for maximum impact and minimum liability. Jake's just settling in, you know how it is. Actually, I don't. When I move into someone's house, I try not to rearrange their entire life. Vanessa perched on the arm of the couch, maintaining that professional distance she'd been perfecting for months. He's going through a difficult time, Nick. His divorce was brutal, and he lost almost everything. We're just helping a friend. A friend. I finally looked at her. Vanessa, the man has been here longer than some leases. He's got his gym equipment in our basement, his protein powder in our kitchen, and his attitude all over our marriage. Don't be dramatic. Dramatic? I came home yesterday to find him wearing my Harvard sweatshirt, eating food I bought, while explaining to your book club why I don't understand modern relationships in my own living room. The memory still burned. Jake sprawled across my couch like he owned it, holding court with Vanessa's friends while I stood in my own doorway like a stranger. Megan had actually looked surprised to see me, as if she'd forgotten I lived there. He was just making conversation. He told them I was old-fashioned for expecting privacy in my own home. Then he suggested we install a hot tub in the backyard. Our backyard, Vanessa. The one I've spent 3 years landscaping. Vanessa's jaw tightened, the first real emotion I'd seen from her in weeks. You're being selfish, Nick. Jake needs our support right now. He's rebuilding his entire life. What about my life? What about our marriage? Our marriage is fine. Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like we're running a boarding house, and I'm the only one paying rent. She stood abruptly, her robe billowing around her like armor. If you're so unhappy with our living situation, maybe you should consider your options. The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. I'd heard that tone before, in her office voice when she was denying insurance claims. Cool, professional, final. What exactly are you saying, Vanessa? I'm saying that even if you can't handle having a friend stay with us during a crisis, maybe you need to examine what kind of person that makes you. And if I decide I can't handle it? She met my eyes for the first time in the conversation, and what I saw there chilled me more than her words. Then maybe you should find somewhere else to be unhappy. The silence stretched between us like a fault line. Upstairs, Jake's television murmured through the walls, some late-night sports commentary that somehow felt like mockery. You want me to leave? I want you to grow up and stop making everything about you. I set down my whiskey glass with deliberate care. 22 years of marriage, and it had come to this. My wife choosing her friend over her husband in the home I'd worked 60-hour weeks to afford. You know what, Vanessa? You're absolutely right. Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or the first hint of uncertainty. What do you mean? I mean, you've made your choice very clear. Jake's comfort is more important than my happiness. His needs matter more than our marriage, and you'd rather I leave than ask him to. Nick, I didn't say you didn't have to. I stood, feeling something cold and sharp settling in my chest where the hurt used to be. You want me gone if I can't accept the situation. Message received. Where are you going? I was already heading for the stairs, my mind surprisingly clear for the first time in months. To pack. You said if I don't like it, I should leave. Congratulations, Vanessa. You finally found something we agree on. Nick, wait. But I was already climbing the stairs, past the guest room where Jake's laughter had started this whole conversation. The door was cracked open, and I could see him sprawled across the queen bed I'd assembled myself, remote in one hand, beer in the other, looking like a man who'd won the lottery. He looked up as I passed, our eyes meeting for just a moment. The smirk that crossed his face told me everything I needed to know about how temporary his stay had ever been intended to be. Everything okay out there, buddy? He called after me, and the false concern in his voice was the final nail in the coffin of my marriage. I didn't answer. I was too busy planning. The poorhouse hadn't changed since high school. Same scarred wooden bar, same neon beer signs casting red and blue shadows across faces that had seen too much of both. At 11 on a Tuesday morning, it was mostly empty except for Frank Delacroix behind the bar and a couple of regulars who had made day drinking into an art form. Frank looked up as I walked in, his weathered face creasing into something between a smile and a grimace. We'd known each other since we were 16, and he could read my moods better than my wife. Little early for you, isn't it, Nick? Little late for everything else. I slid onto my usual stool and nodded toward the whiskey shelf. Make it a double. Frank poured without comment, then leaned against the bar with the practiced patience of a man who'd heard every sob story in town. Want to talk about it? Vanessa kicked me out. Figured that was coming. He said it matter-of-factly, like he'd been watching the weather and predicting rain. Jake Morrison's been bragging around town about how he's got it made at your place. Free room, free board, and a woman who hangs on his every word. The whiskey burned, but not as much as Frank's confirmation of what I'd suspected. How long has he been talking? Couple months now. Comes in here after his workouts, holds court with whoever's listening. Real piece of work, that one. What's he been saying? Frank glanced around the empty bar, then leaned closer. Claims Vanessa sees what a real man looks like now. Says you're too soft, too comfortable. According to Jake, she's finally waking up to what she's been missing. I finished the whiskey and pushed the glass forward for another. Anything else? He's been pretty free with details about your house. Knows where you keep your tools, your spare keys, even your bank statements. Acts like he owns the place. He does, apparently. Vanessa made it pretty clear last night that his comfort matters more than our marriage. So what's your play? I stared into the amber liquid, watching the light refract through it like sunlight through broken glass. She told me if I don't like the situation, I should leave. And I'm going to take her advice. Frank raised an eyebrow. Running away is not your style, Nick. Who said anything about running? I met his eyes and smiled for the first time in months. She said leave. She didn't say anything about taking the house with me. Understanding dawned across Frank's face like sunrise. The house is in your name. Premarital asset. I bought it 3 years before we got married, renovated it myself, never added her to the deed. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to my lawyer's number. Amazing what you remember when your wife chooses another man over you. Jesus, Nick, you're really gonna do it? Vanessa wanted me gone so badly she was willing to end our marriage over it. I'm just giving her what she asked for. Frank whistled low. That's going to shake up more than just your household. Half the neighborhood thinks Jake's some kind of catch. Megan's been telling anyone who will listen how lucky Vanessa is to have such a devoted friend. Megan from the insurance office? The same. She's been spending a lot of time at your place lately, hasn't she? I thought about the book club meetings that had become weekly occurrences, the wine nights that stretched past midnight, the way Megan always seemed to be there whenever I came home from work. Yeah, she has. Might want to ask yourself why a single woman spends so much time watching her friend's perfect relationship with the house guest. The implication hit me like a physical blow. You think Jake and Megan? I think Jake Morrison's the kind of man who keeps his options open. And I think Megan's the kind of woman who doesn't mind being an option as long as she thinks she might become the choice. I stared at my reflection in the bar mirror, seeing a man who'd been played by people he'd trusted. The hurt was still there, but it was transforming into something colder and more useful. Frank, I need to ask you a favor. Name it. Keep your ears open. If Jake or any of Vanessa's friends start talking about what's happening at my house, I want to know about it. You planning something? I'm planning everything. I left the poorhouse with a clarity I hadn't felt in months and drove straight to my lawyer's office. Margaret Chen had handled my house purchase and would handle its sale. She was sharp, no nonsense, and had no patience for people who tried to take advantage of others. Nick, good to see you. Though I'm guessing this isn't a social call. I need to sell my house, fast. Margaret leaned back in her chair, studying me with the intense focus that made her one of the best real estate attorneys in the state. Want to tell me what's going on? I laid out the situation, Jake's extended stay, Vanessa's ultimatum, the way my own home had become enemy territory. Margaret listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on her legal pad. The house is entirely in your name. Premarital asset, never added Vanessa to the deed. Any joint improvements or renovations since marriage? I did all the work myself, paid for materials with money from my separate account. Then legally, you're free to sell whenever you want. You'll need to give Vanessa notice if she's been living there as a tenant, but since she's your wife, that gets complicated. What if she's not living there as my wife anymore? Margaret's pen stopped moving. Are you filing for divorce? Not yet. But she made it clear last night that our marriage is over if I don't accept Jake as a permanent fixture. I'm just taking her at her word. Nick, I have to ask, are you sure about this? Selling the family home is a big step, and it's going to burn a lot of bridges. Margaret, they already burned the bridge. I'm just making sure they can't cross back over it. She was quiet for a long moment, then pulled out a fresh file folder. Okay, if we're doing this, we're doing it right. I'll need a property appraisal, title search, and we'll want to list it as soon as possible. Market's hot right now. We should be able to move it quickly. How quickly? If we price it right, 30 days, maybe less. Perfect. And Margaret, I want to give Vanessa and Jake official notice that they need to vacate. 30 days, just like any other tenant. That's going to create some drama. Good. They created the situation. Now they get to live with the consequences. I left Margaret's office feeling lighter than I had in months. The plan was simple, legal, and completely devastating. Vanessa wanted Jake more than she wanted our marriage. She could have him. Just not in my house, with my monies and surrounded by my things. My phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. Where are you? We need to talk. I typed back, at my lawyer's office. We'll talk when I get home. Her response came immediately. Your lawyer? Nick, don't do anything stupid. I almost laughed. After 6 months of watching another man take over my life while my wife cheered him on, she was worried about me doing something stupid. I drove home slowly, taking the long way through our neighborhood. It really was beautiful. Tree-lined streets, well-maintained houses, the kind of place where people raised families and built lives. Vanessa had always loved that about it, the respectability and status it represented. She was going to hate losing it. Jake's car was in my driveway when I pulled up, parked in the spot where I usually put my own vehicle. It was a small thing, but it perfectly captured everything wrong with the situation. In 6 months, he'd gone from grateful house guest to entitled resident, and Vanessa had enabled every step of that transformation. I parked on the street and walked up to my own front door, fishing for keys like a visitor. Through the window, I could see Vanessa and Jake sitting at my kitchen table, heads close together in conversation. They looked up when I walked in, and the guilt that flashed across both their faces told me everything I needed to know about what they'd been discussing. Nick. Vanessa stood quickly, smoothing down her hair. We need to talk. Yes, we do. I set my keys on the counter and looked around the kitchen, at Jake's protein shakes in my refrigerator, his workout supplements lined up on my counter, his dirty dishes in my sink. But first, I have something for both of you. I pulled out the legal documents Margaret had prepared and set them on the table. 30 days' notice to vacate the premises, both of you. The silence that followed was deafening. Jake picked up the papers with hands that weren't quite steady, his face cycling through confusion, anger, and something that might have been fear. You can't do this, Vanessa said, but her voice lacked conviction. Actually, I can. The house is in my name and I'm selling it. You have 30 days to find other accommodations. Selling it? Jake's voice cracked slightly. You can't sell the house out from under us. Watch me. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of real estate showings, legal paperwork, and increasingly desperate attempts by Vanessa and Jake to change my mind. What they didn't understand was that my mind had been changed the moment Vanessa chose him over our marriage. Everything after that was just logistics. Margaret had been right about the market. We had 6 serious offers within the first week, and by day 10, we'd accepted one that was $15,000 over asking price. The new owners were a young couple from Boston who fell in love with the renovated kitchen and wanted to close as soon as possible. I scheduled the first showing for Tuesday afternoon, knowing Vanessa had important client calls that day. What I didn't tell her was that I'd specifically requested the showing to run from 2 to 4, right during her biggest presentation of the month. Mr. Peterson? The realtor, Sandra Walsh, was a consummate professional who'd sold half the houses in our neighborhood. The buyers are here more for their final walkthrough. Perfect timing. I opened the front door to reveal the young couple and their mortgage broker. all dressed for business and carrying clipboards. From upstairs came the sound of Vanessa's voice, sharp and professional. As you can see from the actuarial tables, the risk assessment clearly indicates, is someone having a meeting? Asked the wife, a petite brunette who looked concerned. My soon-to-be ex-wife has a video conference, I explained. Don't worry about the noise. We'd barely made it to the living room when Jake appeared from the kitchen, wearing nothing but boxer shorts and a tank top, protein shake in hand. He stopped dead when he saw the group of strangers in his borrowed living room. Oh, hey. He looked around like he'd forgotten where he was. Nick, you didn't tell me we were having company. The mortgage broker's eyebrows shot up. The young couple exchanged glances. Sandra Walsh, to her credit, didn't miss a beat. This is Jake, I said pleasantly. He's been staying in the guest room, temporarily. Right, temporarily. Jake's face had gone red, but he seemed frozen in place, apparently unable to decide whether to flee or try to brazen it out. From upstairs, Vanessa's voice rose in frustration. No. The liability exposure is significantly higher when you factor in, Jake, is that you talking down there? I'm in the middle of a presentation. Maybe we should come back later, suggested the husband. Nonsense, I said. This is exactly what living here is like. Full transparency. Sandra shot me a look that could have melted steel, but she gamely continued the tour. As you can see, the living room features original hardwood floors and custom built-in shelving. Jake finally seemed to realize he was standing half undressed in front of strangers and mumbled something about getting dressed before disappearing upstairs. Unfortunately, his room was right next to Vanessa's home office, and we could hear their heated, whispered argument through the thin walls. The kitchen has been completely renovated, Sandra continued, raising her voice slightly to cover the sound of Vanessa's conference call falling apart upstairs. Granite countertops, stainless steel appliances, and a large island perfect for entertaining. What's that smell? Asked the wife, wrinkling her nose. I followed her gaze to the sink where Jake's post-workout dishes had been soaking for 3 days. The protein residue had developed an aroma that could charitably be described as biological. That would be the current tenant's contribution to the kitchen ambiance. I said, don't worry, it comes with the current occupants, not the house. The couple was looking increasingly uncomfortable, but Sandra pressed on with professional determination. We made it through the dining room and were heading toward the basement when Vanessa's voice exploded from upstairs. I don't care what they're doing down there. This is my house, too, and I have a right to conduct business without... What do you mean they're potential buyers? The young couple stopped walking. The mortgage broker pulled out his phone and started typing notes. Sandra's smile had taken on a distinctly strained quality. Perhaps we should see the basement, she suggested. The basement was where Jake had really made himself at home. His weight equipment dominated the space I'd finished as a family room, and his gym clothes were draped over every available surface. The smell of stale sweat and protein powder hung in the air like a fog. This is a fully finished basement, Sandra said weakly. Perfect for a home gym or recreation room. Or a live-in fitness instructor, I added helpfully. The husband was taking pictures with his phone, not the good kind of pictures. His wife was breathing through her mouth and looking toward the stairs like a trapped animal. Peterson, Sandra said through gritted teeth, could I speak with you privately for a moment? We stepped into the laundry room, where she immediately rounded on me with the fury of a professional whose commission was evaporating before her eyes. What the heck are you trying to do? These people are ready to buy, and you're sabotaging your own sale. I'm not sabotaging anything. I'm showing them exactly what they're getting. A house that comes with 2 freeloading adults who think they own the place. They're buying the house, not the current living situation. Are they? Because from what I can see, the current living situation has become a permanent feature. Jake's got more stuff here than I do, and my wife just told a room full of insurance executives that this is her house too. Sandra stared at me for a long moment. Then something like understanding crossed her face. You're not trying to sell them the house. You're trying to humiliate your wife and her boyfriend. Jake's not her boyfriend. He's just a friend who's been living here for 6 months, sleeping in my guest room, eating my food, and making himself comfortable in my marriage. And you want them to see exactly how comfortable he's gotten. I want them to see the truth. If they still want to buy after seeing what they're getting into, then they're the right buyers. Sandra shook her head, but she was smiling now, a sharp, predatory smile that suggested she was starting to enjoy the show. You're either crazy or brilliant. Why can't I be both? We rejoined the group to find them huddled near the stairs, whispering urgently among themselves. Upstairs, Vanessa's conference call had apparently ended badly, and we could hear her storming around her office. I think we've seen enough, said the husband. Are you sure? We haven't looked at the guest room yet. That's where Jake sleeps. I'm sure he'd be happy to show you his setup. The wife actually shuddered. No, thank you. We'll be in touch. They fled toward the stairs like the house was on fire. Sandra followed them, shooting me a look that promised a very interesting conversation later. I was left alone in the basement, surrounded by Jake's equipment and the lingering smell of his presence. Upstairs, I could hear Vanessa's heels clicking across the hardwood floors with the sharp rhythm of barely controlled rage. She appeared at the top of the basement stairs like an avenging angel, her professional composure completely shattered. What did you just do? Showed some potential buyers around their future home. How did your presentation go? You know exactly how it went. You scheduled that showing deliberately, didn't you? I climbed the stairs slowly, enjoying the way she had to back up to give me room. I scheduled it for a time that worked for the buyers. If that conflicted with your work, maybe you should consider finding somewhere else to take your calls. This is my home office. For 8 more days. The number hit her like a physical blow. In 8 days, the sale would close and she'd have to be out. Jake, too. The reality of it was finally sinking in. Nick, we need to talk about this. Really talk, not just throw legal papers at each other. What's to talk about? You made your choice. You chose Jake over me, his comfort over our marriage. I'm just making sure you get to live with that choice. I never said I chose Jake over you. You didn't have to. You said it with your actions, 6 months of them. Jake appeared at the top of the stairs, now fully dressed, but still looking like a man who'd been caught stealing. Hey, maybe I should give you two some privacy. Don't bother, I said. We're past the point of private conversations. Besides, this concerns you too. Look, Nick, I think there's been some misunderstanding here. I never meant to cause problems between you and Vanessa. The sincerity in his voice was almost impressive. If I hadn't spent 6 months watching him systematically take over my life, I might have even believed him. No misunderstanding, Jake. You moved into my house, made yourself comfortable, and convinced my wife that I was the problem. Mission accomplished. That's not what happened, isn't it? Then, explain to me how a 2-week stay turned into 6 months. Explain how you ended up with more say in my household decisions than I do. Explain how my own wife sided with you when I asked for my life back. Jake looked to Vanessa for support, but she was staring at the floor, her face pale and drawn. I was going through a divorce, he said finally. I lost everything. Vanessa was just being a good friend. And what were you being, Jake? The question hung in the air between us. Jake's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no words came out. That's what I thought, I said. You were being a man who saw an opportunity and took it. A free place to live, a woman to take care of you, and a husband too polite to throw you out. Must have felt like winning the lottery. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. I also understand that the lottery's over. You have 8 days to find somewhere else to play house. I left them standing in the hallway and walked out to my car. I had a meeting with Frank at the poorhouse, and he'd promised to share some interesting information about what Jake had been saying around town. As I drove away, I could see them through the living room window, Vanessa and Jake, heads together again. No doubt planning their next move. Let them plan. In 8 days, they'd be planning from somewhere else. Frank was waiting for me at the poorhouse, with a beer and the kind of expression that meant he had news. Good news for me, bad news for someone else. You look like the cat that ate the canary, I said, sliding onto my usual stool. Better, I look like the cat that watched the canary eat itself. He slid a beer across the bar and leaned in conspiratorially. Jake was in here last night, drunk, angry, and running his mouth to anyone who'd listen. What was he saying? That you're trying to steal his girlfriend's house out from under them. I nearly choked on my beer. His girlfriend? That's what he called her. Said you were just the jealous husband who couldn't handle that Vanessa had found someone better. The audacity was breathtaking, but it explained a lot about Jake's behavior over the past 6 months. In his mind, he wasn't a house guest who'd overstayed his welcome. He was Vanessa's boyfriend, graciously allowing her husband to stick around. Did anyone believe him? Most people just nodded and changed the subject, but Megan was here, and she was hanging on every word. Megan was here with Jake? Frank's grin widened. Oh, it gets better. She was here with Jake, but she left with Tommy Brennan from the auto shop. Seems like Jake's not the only one keeping his options open. The pieces were starting to fall into place. Megan had been spending time at my house, ostensibly supporting Vanessa through her difficult marriage, but really positioning herself as Jake's backup plan. Meanwhile, Jake had been playing both women, probably promising each of them a different version of the future. Frank, I need another favor. Name it. I want to know when Jake comes in here again, and I want to know who he talks to. Planning something? I'm planning to give him enough rope to hang himself. I left the poorhouse with a new appreciation for just how complicated the situation had become. It wasn't just about my marriage anymore. Jake had been weaving a web of lies and promises that involved half the people in town. When it collapsed, the fallout was going to be spectacular. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Buyers want to do final walkthrough tomorrow at 6 p.m. Can you make sure house is presentable? I typed back, define presentable, clean, empty of personal drama, and no half-undressed house guests. I'll do my best. But even as I sent the reply, I was formulating a different plan. Tomorrow's walkthrough was going to be very interesting indeed. I drove home to find Jake's car missing from the driveway and Vanessa's car parked in the garage. For the first time in months, I might actually have my house to myself. Vanessa was in the kitchen when I walked in, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee and a stack of real estate listings. She looked up when I entered, and I was surprised to see that she'd been crying. Where's Jake? At the gym. He's been spending a lot of time there lately. Trouble in paradise? She flinched like I'd slapped her. Nick, can we please just talk? Like adults? Sure, what do you want to talk about? This. She gestured at the real estate listings. What you're doing to us. What I'm doing to you, Vanessa. You told me to leave if I didn't like the situation. I'm leaving. I'm just taking my house with me. You know I didn't mean it like that. How did you mean it? She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee like it might hold answers. I meant that you needed to be more understanding, more flexible, more willing to let another man take over my life, you mean? Jake isn't taking over anything. He's just what, Vanessa? Just sleeping in my house, eating my food, giving advice about my marriage, and telling people around town that you're his girlfriend? Her head snapped up. What? You didn't know? Jake's been telling people at the poorhouse that I'm the jealous husband who can't handle that you've found someone better. He calls you his girlfriend. The color drained from her face. That's not true. Ask Frank. Better yet, ask Megan. She was there when he said it. Megan's been playing both sides, Vanessa. She's been supporting you while positioning herself as Jake's backup plan. Last night, she left the bar with Tommy Brennan while Jake sat there drunk and talking about his girlfriend. Vanessa set down her coffee cup with shaking hands. You're lying. Why would I lie? In 3 days, this will all be over. You'll be out of my house. Jake will be out of my life, and I'll be free to start over somewhere else. I don't need to lie to make that happen. But if what you're saying is true, then you've been played by a man who saw you as a meal ticket and a woman who saw you as competition. Welcome to the club, Vanessa. I've been watching it happen for 6 months. She sat in silence for several minutes, and I could almost see her mind working through the implications. Every conversation with Jake, every supportive talk with Megan, every moment when she'd chosen their advice over her husband's concerns. All of it took on a different meaning in light of what I'd just told her. What am I supposed to do now? Whatever you want. You're a grown woman with a good job and plenty of options. You don't need Jake, and you sure don't need Megan. But I need you. The words hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I wanted to cross. 6 months ago, they would have changed everything. Now they just sounded like another manipulation. Do you, or do you just need someone to pay for the life you want to live? That's not fair. Fair? Vanessa, you chose another man over your husband. You prioritize his comfort over our marriage. You made me a stranger in my own home. And now that it's all falling apart, you want to talk about fair? I made a mistake. You made a choice, a series of choices over 6 months. This isn't a mistake, it's a pattern. My phone buzzed with a text. Jake, need to talk. Meet me at the house in an hour. I showed the message to Vanessa. Looks like your boyfriend wants a meeting. He's not my boyfriend. Then you'd better make sure he knows that. I left her sitting at the kitchen table and went upstairs to pack more of my things. Tomorrow was the final walkthrough, and I wanted to be ready for whatever Jake had planned. An hour later, I heard his car in the driveway. Through the bedroom window, I watched him get out and stride toward the house with the confidence of a man who thought he held all the cards. He was about to learn otherwise. I came downstairs to find him in the living room with Vanessa, both of them looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. The easy intimacy I'd observed between them for months was gone, replaced by the awkward tension of two people who'd been caught in a lie. Nick. Jake stood when I entered, extending his hand like we were meeting for the first time. Thanks for agreeing to talk. I ignored the handshake. What do you want, Jake? I want to clear the air. There's been some misunderstanding about my relationship with Vanessa, and I think we need to set the record straight. By all means, enlighten me. Vanessa and I are friends. Good friends, but just friends. I know how it might look, me staying here for so long, but it's not what you think. What do I think, Jake? That there's something romantic between us. There isn't. I looked at Vanessa, who was studying the floor like it contained the secrets of the universe. Is that true, Vanessa? You and Jake are just friends? Yes. Good friends? Yes. The kind of good friends who make decisions about each other's marriages? She looked up sharply. What do you mean? I mean, Jake's been giving you advice about our relationship for 6 months. Advice you've taken over your husband's feelings. That's a very good friend indeed. Jake shifted uncomfortably. I was just trying to help. Help with what? Vanessa was unhappy. She felt like you didn't appreciate her, didn't understand what she needed. And you did understand? I listened to her. I supported her. You undermined her marriage. I helped her see that she deserved better. The words hung in the air like an admission of guilt. Vanessa stared at Jake with something approaching horror, finally understanding what had been happening. Better than what, Jake? She asked quietly. Better than being taken for granted. Better than being married to someone who doesn't see how amazing you are. Someone like Nick? Someone like Nick. I almost felt sorry for him. He'd just confessed to deliberately sabotaging my marriage while claiming to be just a friend. Even Jake wasn't smooth enough to talk his way out of that one. So let me make sure I understand, I said. You moved into my house, spent 6 months convincing my wife that I wasn't good enough for her, and now you want to clear the air about your innocent friendship? It's not like that. Then what is it like, Jake? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you saw an opportunity to break up a marriage and take over another man's life. That's not what I wanted. What did you want? He looked at Vanessa, then back at me, and for the first time since I'd known him, Jake Morrison looked genuinely uncertain. I wanted a place to belong. The honesty in his voice was almost enough to make me feel sorry for him. Almost. Well, you found one. For 6 months, you belonged here more than I did. Congratulations, Jake. You got exactly what you wanted. But now you're taking it away. Now I'm taking back what was always mine. What about Vanessa? What about what she wants? I looked at my wife, who was still staring at Jake like she'd never seen him before. Vanessa's a grown woman. She can make her own choices. She's been doing it for 6 months. Vanessa? Jake turned to her with something like desperation in his voice. Tell him. Tell him you want me to stay. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Vanessa looked from Jake to me and back again, her face cycling through emotions I couldn't read. I think, she said finally, then, that maybe it's time for you to find your own place, Jake. The words hit him like a physical blow. His face went white, then red, then white again. You're choosing him? After everything we've talked about? I'm choosing to stop letting other people make my decisions for me. Jake looked around the room like he was seeing it for the first time. The house he'd made his own, the life he'd tried to steal, the woman he'd thought he'd won. All of it slipping away in the space of a single conversation. This isn't over, he said, but the words lacked conviction. Yes, it is, I replied. You have 2 days to get your things and get out. After that, you'll be trespassing. He left without another word, slamming the door behind him hard enough to rattle the windows. Vanessa and I stood in the sudden silence, two people who'd been married for 22 years and had somehow become strangers. What happens now? She asked. Now you decide what you really want, Vanessa. Not what Jake wants, not what Megan wants, not what anyone else wants, what you want. And if what I want is to save our marriage, then you'd better figure out how to do it in 2 days, because that's when the new owners take possession, and this part of our life ends forever. The morning of the closing dawned gray and cold, with the kind of bitter wind that cuts through clothing and settles in your bones. Perfect weather for endings. I'd spent the night at the poorhouse's upstairs apartment. Frank had offered it when he realized I was serious about selling. From the window, I could see my house 3 blocks away, looking smaller somehow in the pale morning light. My phone had been buzzing all night with texts from Vanessa, ranging from pleading to angry to desperate. Jake had apparently packed his things in a fury the night before, loading his car with the efficiency of a man who'd had plenty of practice at quick exits. But he hadn't left town. Frank had seen him at the motel on Route 9, drinking in the parking lot and making phone calls. He's planning something, Frank had warned. That's not the behavior of a man who's accepting defeat. I was counting on it. The closing was scheduled for 10 a.m. at Margaret's office. The final walkthrough was set for 9, giving the buyers one last chance to make sure they were getting what they'd paid for. What they were actually going to get was a front-row seat to the final act of a 6-month drama. I arrived at the house at 8:30 to find Vanessa's car in the driveway and Jake's car parked across the street. Through the window, I could see them in what looked like an intense conversation in the living room. Perfect. I let myself in through the front door, and their conversation stopped abruptly. Vanessa looked like she hadn't slept, her usually perfect appearance disheveled and strained. Jake looked angry and desperate, like a man who'd run out of options. Nick, Vanessa stood quickly, we need to talk. The buyers will be here in 30 minutes for their final walkthrough. Whatever you need to say, make it quick. I can't let you do this. You can't stop me from doing this. The papers are signed, the money's been transferred, and in 1 hour, this house belongs to someone else. I'll fight you. I'll claim spousal interest, community property. With what lawyer? With what money? Vanessa, your name isn't on the deed, you didn't pay for the house, and you chose another man over your marriage. No judge in the state is going to side with you. Jake stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists. You can't just throw us out on the street. I'm not throwing anyone anywhere. I'm selling my house to people who actually want to live in it, not use it as a base of operations for destroying someone else's life. I never destroyed anything. Really? Then explain to me how my marriage survived 22 years until you moved into the guest room. Your marriage was already broken. Was it? Or did you just see an opportunity and decide to break it yourself? The accusation hung in the air between us. Jake's face cycled through anger, denial, and something that might have been shame. That's not what happened, isn't it? You moved in here, spent 6 months undermining my relationship with my wife, convinced her that I was the problem, and made yourself so comfortable that you started calling her your girlfriend. If that's not destroying a marriage, what would you call it? I call it helping a friend see what she deserves. And what does she deserve, Jake? Better than you. The words came out with such venom that even Vanessa stepped back. Jake realized what he'd said and tried to backtrack, but it was too late. The mask had finally slipped completely. There it is, I said quietly. 6 months of pretending to be the concerned friend, and it all comes down to that. You think Vanessa deserves better than me. She does. Maybe. But that's not your decision to make. A car door slammed outside, and I looked through the window to see Sandra Walsh getting out of her sedan, followed by the young couple and their mortgage broker. The final walkthrough was about to begin. They're here, I announced. Time for the show. Nick, please. Vanessa grabbed my arm. Don't do this. Not like this. Do what? Show them the house they're buying? Let them see what they're getting into? You know what I mean. I know exactly what you mean. You want me to pretend that everything's fine, that this is just a normal real estate transaction, that you and Jake are reasonable people who are graciously moving out. But that's not what this is, Vanessa. This is the end of a marriage, the end of a friendship, and the end of 6 months of lies. The doorbell rang, and I went to answer it. Sandra Walsh stood on my front porch with her professional smile firmly in place, but I could see the wariness in her eyes. She'd been through enough showings with me to know that normal rules didn't apply. Good morning, Nick. Ready for the final walkthrough? More than ready. Come on in. The young couple followed her inside, looking around with the nervous excitement of first-time homebuyers. They'd been through enough showings to know what to expect, but they clearly weren't prepared for what they found in the living room. Vanessa and Jake stood frozen like actors who'd forgotten their lines. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife, and the buyers immediately picked up on it. Oh, said the wife. Are we interrupting something? Not at all, I said cheerfully. Vanessa and Jake were just discussing their moving plans. Weren't you? Vanessa managed a weak smile. Yes, we're very excited for you. Jake said nothing, just stood there, radiating hostility like a space heater. Shall we start the walkthrough? and Sandra suggested, clearly eager to get things moving. We made it through the living room and dining room without incident. But the kitchen was where things started to get interesting. Jake had apparently decided to make one last stand, and he'd chosen the most public possible venue to do it. You know, he said loudly, it's really too bad Nick is forcing this sale. Vanessa loves this house. The buyer stopped examining the granite countertops and turned to look at him. Sandra's smile became even more strained. I'm sure the transition is difficult for everyone, she said diplomatically. Especially when it's completely unnecessary, Jake continued. But some people would rather destroy something beautiful than share it. Share it? I couldn't help myself. Jake, you've been living here for 6 months rent-free. How much more sharing did you have in mind? I've been helping Vanessa through a difficult time by convincing her to choose you over her husband. The buyers were now staring openly, their excitement replaced by the uncomfortable fascination of people watching a car accident in slow motion. That's not what happened, Jake said, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? Then explain to these nice people why my wife's best friend has been sleeping in my guest room for half a year while giving her advice about our marriage. Jake, Vanessa said quietly, please don't. Don't what? Don't tell the truth? Don't let them see what kind of man they're buying a house from? The kind of man who pays for his own house and expects to live in it without interference from freeloading house guests, I suggested. The kind of man who throws his wife out on the street rather than accept that she's found someone better. The words exploded out of him with such force that everyone in the kitchen took a step back. The buyers looked like they wanted to run. Sandra looked like she wanted to commit homicide. And Vanessa looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Someone better? I asked quietly. Is that what you are, Jake? Better? I'm someone who appreciates what he has. What you have? Jake, you don't have anything. You don't have a house. You've been squatting in mine. You don't have a relationship with Vanessa. You've been manipulating her. You don't even have the moral high ground. You've been undermining a marriage for your own benefit. That's not true. Then prove it. Tell these people about your relationship with Megan. Tell them about the promises you've been making to different women. Tell them about calling Vanessa your girlfriend while she was still married to me. Jake's face went white, then red, then white again. He looked around the kitchen like a trapped animal, seeing the judgment in every face. I don't have to listen to this. No, you don't. You can leave any time. In fact, I encourage it. Fine. He turned to Vanessa with something like desperation in his eyes. Are you coming with me? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Vanessa looked from Jake, to me, to the buyers, to Sandra, and I could see her making calculations about the future, about her choices, about what she really wanted. No, she said finally. I'm not. Jake stared at her like she'd spoken in a foreign language. What? I said no, I'm not going with you. But we talked about this. We planned. You planned, Jake. You've been planning my life for 6 months, and I let you. But I'm done being planned for. Vanessa, you can't mean that. I mean it. I want you to leave, now. The finality in her voice seemed to hit Jake like a physical blow. He looked around the kitchen one more time, his gaze lingering on the granite countertops, the stainless steel appliances, the life he'd tried to make his own. This isn't over, he said, but the words sounded hollow. Yes, it is, I replied. It's been over since the moment you decided my marriage was your opportunity. Jake left through the back door, slamming it hard enough to rattle the windows. We could hear his car starting in the driveway, then the squeal of tires as he drove away too fast. The silence that followed was deafening. The buyer stood in my kitchen looking shell-shocked. Sandra looked like she needed a drink, and Vanessa looked like she'd aged 10 years in the past 10 minutes. Well, said the husband finally, that was intense. I'm so sorry, Vanessa said. You shouldn't have had to see that. Actually, said the wife, it's kind of reassuring. We all stared at her. Reassuring. We've been worried about buying a house with so much drama attached to it. But seeing Jake leave like that, it feels like the drama's leaving with him. Sandra seized the moment like the professional she was. Shall we continue the walkthrough? I think you'll find the rest of the house much more peaceful. We finished the tour without further incident. The buyers loved the renovated bathroom, admired the hardwood floors, and were impressed by the finished basement, especially now that it wasn't full of Jake's gym equipment. We're very excited to make this our home, the wife said as we concluded the walkthrough. It has such good bones. It does, I agreed. It just needed the right people living in it. After they left, Vanessa and I stood in the empty living room, surrounded by the echoes of 22 years of marriage and 6 months of betrayal. What happens now? She asked. Now I go to the closing, sign the papers, and walk away with a check. What you do is up to you. I mean, what happens to us? I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in months. She was still beautiful, still the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. But she was also the woman who'd chosen another man over our marriage, who'd prioritized a manipulative house guest over her husband's happiness. I don't know, Vanessa. I honestly don't know if there's an us anymore. There could be. We could start over. Could we? Because every time I look at you, I'm going to remember the past 6 months. Every time we have a disagreement, I'm going to wonder if you'll choose someone else's opinion over mine. Every time a friend needs help, I'm going to worry about who's really moving in. Tears ran down her cheeks, but she didn't try to wipe them away. I made a mistake. You made a choice. A lot of choices. And now we both have to live with the consequences. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Closing in 30 minutes. You ready? I typed back, on my way. I have to go, I told Vanessa. The closing's in 30 minutes. Where will you go after? I don't know yet. Somewhere without house guests, probably. She almost smiled at that. And for a moment I could see the woman I'd married beneath the stranger she'd become. Nick, for what it's worth, I really am sorry. I know you are. But sorry doesn't undo 6 months of damage. I left her standing in the empty living room and drove to Margaret's office for the closing. The paperwork took less than an hour. Signatures, transfers, handshakes, and a check that represented the end of one life and the beginning of another. What's next? Margaret asked as we walked out of the office. I'm thinking about that cabin in Vermont you mentioned, the one with no neighbors and no guest room. Sounds perfect. I drove past the house one last time on my way out of town. The new owners were already there with a moving truck, carrying boxes and furniture into what had been my home. Vanessa's car was gone, and there was no sign of Jake. At the town line, I pulled over and looked back at the place where I'd spent the last 15 years of my life. It looked smaller in the rearview mirror, less important somehow. Maybe that was the point. My phone rang, Frank's number. You really did it, he said without preamble. I really did. Jake came by the bar an hour ago. Drunk, angry, and looking for someone to blame, I threw him out. Good. He said this wasn't over. It is for me. What Jake does now is between him and whatever's left of his conscience. And Vanessa? I thought about that for a moment, watching the town disappear in my rearview mirror. Vanessa's a grown woman with a good job and plenty of options. She'll figure it out. You heading to Vermont? Eventually. First, I think I'll drive for a while, see what's out there. Keep in touch. I will. I hung up and pulled back onto the highway, heading north toward whatever came next. In my rearview mirror, the past grew smaller and smaller until it finally disappeared altogether. Behind me, Jake Morrison was probably at another bar, telling another sob story to anyone who would listen, looking for another opportunity to insert himself into someone else's life. Vanessa was probably in her office, explaining to her coworkers why she was suddenly looking for an apartment. Megan was probably wondering why her phone calls weren't being returned. But none of that was my problem anymore. For the first time in 6 months, I was free to make my own decisions, live my own life, and sleep in my own bed without wondering who else might be making themselves comfortable in my space. The road stretched out ahead of me, empty and full of possibilities. I rolled down the windows, turned up the radio, and drove toward whatever came next, finally free from the wreckage of a marriage that had died the moment my wife chose another man over the one she'd promised to love, honor, and cherish. Room for one more?